almost like a crazy evangelical, I've always known that the age of design is upon us, almost like a rapture. You know, if the day is sunny, I think, oh, the gods have had a good design day, you know. Or I go to a show and I see a beautiful piece by an artist, particularly beautiful. So, oh, he's so good because he clearly looked to design to understand what he needed to do. So I really do believe that design is the highest form of creative expression. That's why I'm talking to you today about the age of design. And the age of design is the age in which design is still cute furniture, is still posters, is still fast cars, what you see at MoMA today. But in truth, what I really would like to explain to the public and to the audiences of MoMA is that the most interesting chairs are the ones that are actually made by a robot, like this beautiful chair by Dirk van der Kooi, where a robot deposits a toothpaste-like slur of recycled refrigerators parts as if it were a big candy and makes a chair out of it. Or good design are digital fonts that we use all the time and that become part of our identity. I want people to understand that design is so much more than cute chairs, that it is first and foremost everything that is around us in our life. And it's interesting how so much of what we're talking about tonight is not simply design, but interaction design. And in fact, interaction design is what I've been trying to insert in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art for a few years, starting not very timidly, but just, pointedly with works, for instance, by Martin Wattenberg, the way a machine plays chess with itself that you see here, or Lisa Strausfeld and her partners, the Sugar interface for the one laptop per child, Toshio Iwai's Tenorion musical instruments, and Philip Worthington Shadow Monsters, and John Maida's Reactive Books, and also Jonathan Harris and Sepp Kamvar's I Want You to Want Me. These were some of the first acquisitions that really introduced the idea of interaction design to the public. But more recently, I've been trying really to go even deeper into interaction design with examples that are emotional, really suggestive, and that really explain interaction design at a level that is almost undeniable. The wind map by Wattenberg and Fernanda Viegas, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's really fantastic. It looks at the territory of the United States as if it were a wheat field that is like procured by the winds, and that is really giving you a pictorial image of what's going on with the winds in the United States. But also, more recently, we started acquiring video games. And that's where all hell broke loose in a really interesting way. There are still people that believe that there's a high and there's a low. And that's really what I find so intriguing about the reactions that we've had to the anointment of video games in the MoMA collection. First of all, New York Magazine always gets it. I love them. So we are in the right quadrant. We are in the highbrow. That's daring, that's courageous, and brilliant, which is great. Timidly, we've been higher in the diagonal in other situations, but it's okay. It's good, it's good, it's good. But here comes the art critic. Oh, that was fantastic. So the first was Jonathan Jones from The Guardian. Sorry, MoMA, video games are not art. Did I ever say they were art? I was talking about interaction design. Excuse me. Exhibiting Pac-Man and Tetris alongside Picasso and Van Gogh, they're 2 floors away, will mean game over for any real understanding of art. I'm bringing in the end of the world. We were talking about the rapture, it's coming. And Jonathan Jones is making it happen. So the same Guardian rebuts. Are video games art? The debate that shouldn't be. Last week, Guardian art critic blah blah suggested that games cannot qualify as art. But is he right? And does it matter? Thank you. Does it matter? It's like, once again, there's this whole problem of design being often misunderstood for art, or the idea that is so diffuse that designers want to aspire to, would like to be called artists. No, designers aspire to be really great designers. Thank you very much. And that's more than enough. So my knight in a shining armor, John Maida, without any prompt, came out with this big declaration on Wired: video games belong in the MoMA. And that was fantastic. And I thought that was it. But then there was another wonderfully pretentious article that came out in the New Republic, so pretentious, by Lee Leibovitz, and he said, MoMA has mistaken video games for art again. The museum is putting Pac-Man alongside Picasso again. That misses the point. Excuse me, you're missing the point. And here, look, the above question is put bluntly. Are video games art? No. Video games aren't art because they are, quite thoroughly, something else. Code. So Picasso is not art because it's oil paint, right? So it's so fantastic to see how these feathers that were ruffled and these reactions were so vehement. And you know what? The International Cat Video Film Festival didn't have that much of a reaction. I think this was truly fantastic. We were talking about dancing ponies, but I was really jealous of the Walker Arts Center for putting up this festival because it's very, very wonderful. And you know, there's this Flaubert quote that I love. I have always tried to live in an ivory tower, but a tide of shit is beating at its walls, threatening to undermine it. I consider myself the tide of shit. You know, we have to go through that. You know, even in the 1930s, my colleagues that were trying to put together an abstract art show had all of these works stopped by the customs officers that decided they were not art. So it's happened before, and it will happen in the future. But right now, I can tell you that I am so, so proud to be able to call Pac-Man part of the MoMA collection. And the same with, for instance, Tetris, original version, the Soviet one. And you know, the amount of work, yeah, Alexei Pajitnov was working for the Soviet government, and that's how he developed Tetris. And Alexei himself reconstructed the whole game and even gave us a simulation of the cathodic ray tube that makes it look slightly, you know, like it's slightly bombed. And it's fantastic. So behind these acquisitions is an enormous amount of work because we're still the Museum of Modern Art. So even when we tackle popular culture, we tackle it as a form of interaction design and something that has to go into the collection of MoMA, therefore has to be researched. So to get to choosing Eric Chailly's wonderful Another World, amongst others, we put together a panel of experts, and we worked on this acquisition, and it's mostly myself and Kate Carmody and Paul Galloway. We worked on it for a year and a half. So many people helped us, designers of games. You might know Jamin Warren and his collaborators at Kill Screen Magazine, and you know, Kevin Slavin, you name it. We bugged everybody because we knew that we were ignorant. We were not real gamers enough, so we had to really talk to them. And so we decided, of course, to have SimCity 2000, not the other SimCity, that one in particular. So the criteria that we developed along the way were really strong, and were not only criteria of selection. There were also criteria of exhibition and of preservation. That's what makes this acquisition more than a little game or a little joke. It's truly a way to think of how to preserve and show artifacts that will more and more become part of our lives in the future. We live today, as you know very well, not in the digital, not in the physical, but in the kind of minestrone that our mind makes of the two. And that's really where interaction lies, and that's the importance of interaction. And in order to explain interaction, we need to really bring people in and make them realize how interaction is part of their lives. So when I talk about it, I don't talk only about video games, which are in a way the purest form of interaction, unadulterated by any kind of function or finality. I also talk about the MetroCard vending machine, which I consider a masterpiece of interaction. I mean, that interface is beautiful. It looks like a burly MTA guy coming out of the tunnel. You know, you can, with your mitt, you can actually paw the MetroCard. And I talk about how bad ATM machine, you know, usually are. So I let people understand that it's up to them to know how to judge interaction so as to know when it's good or when it's bad. So when I show The Sims, I try to make people really feel what it meant to have an interaction with The Sims. Not only the fun, but also the responsibility that came with the Tamagotchi. You know, video games can be truly deep even when they're completely mindless. I'm sure that all of you know Katamari Damacy. It's about rolling a ball and picking up as many objects as you can in a finite amount of time, and hopefully you'll be able to make it into a planet. I've never made it into a planet, but that's it. Or, you know, Vib Ribbon was not distributed here in the United States. It was a PlayStation game, but mostly for Japan. And it was one of the first video games in which you could choose your own music. So you would put into the PS station, you would put your own CD, and then the game would change alongside your music. So really fantastic. Not to mention EVE Online. EVE Online is an artificial universe, if you wish. But one of the diplomats that was killed in Benghazi, not Ambassador Stevens, but one of his collaborators, was a really big shot in EVE Online. So here you have a diplomat in the real world that spends his time in EVE Online to kind of test maybe all of his ideas about diplomacy and about universe building. And to the point that the first announcement of the bombing was actually given on EVE Online. And after his death, several parts of the universe were named after him. And I was just recently at the EVE Online Fan Festival in Reykjavik that was quite amazing. I mean, we're talking about an experience that, of course, can seem weird to many, but that is very educational. Of course, there are games that are even more educational. Dwarf Fortress is like the holy grail of this kind of massive multiplayer online games. And in fact, the two Adams brothers were in Reykjavik, and they were greeted by a standing ovation by all the EVE Online fans. It was like amazing to see, and it's a beautiful game. So you start seeing here that the aesthetics that are so important to a museum collection like MoMA's are kept alive also by the selection of these games. And you know, Valve, Portal is an example of a video game in which you have a certain type of violence, which also leads me to talk about one of the biggest issues that we had to discuss when we acquired the video games, what to do with violence, right? We had to make decisions. At MoMA, interestingly, there's a lot of violence depicted in the art part of the collection. But when I came to MoMA 19 years ago, and as an Italian, I said, you know what, we need a Beretta. I was told, like, no guns in the design collection. I was like, why? Interestingly, I learned that it's considered that in design, in the design collection, what you see is what you get. So when you see a gun, it's an instrument for killing in the design collection. If it's in the art collection, it might be a critique of the killing instrument. So it's very interesting. But we are acquiring our critical dimension also in design, so maybe one day we'll be able to acquire also the guns. But here, in this particular case, we decided, with Kate and Paul, that we would have no gratuitous violence. So we have Portal because you shoot walls in order to create new spaces. We have Street Fighter 2 because martial arts are good. But we don't have GTA because maybe it's my own reflection. I've never been able to do anything but crashing cars and shooting prostitutes and pimps, so it was not very constructive. But Valve, so a lot. I'm making fun of it, but we discussed this for so many days. I mean, you have no idea. And to this day, I am ambivalent. But when you have instead games like Flow, there's no doubt. It's about serenity and it's about sublime. It's about experiencing what it means to be a sea creature. Then we have a few also side scrollers, classical ones. So it's quite a hefty collection. And right now we started with the first 14, but we have several that are coming up. And the reason why we haven't acquired them yet is because you don't acquire just the game. You acquire the relationship with the company. What we want, what we aspire to is the code. It's very hard to get, of course. But that's what would enable us to preserve the video games for a really long time. And that's what museums do. They also preserve artifacts for posterity. In absence of the code, because video game companies are not very forthcoming in some cases, in absence of that, we acquire the relationship with the company. We're going to stay with them forever. They're not going to get rid of us, and one day we'll get that code. So, but I want to explain to you the criteria that we chose for interaction design. Aesthetics are really important, and I'm showing you Core War here, which is an early game that takes advantage aesthetically of the limitations of the processor. So the kind of interferences that you see here that look like beautiful barriers in the game are actually a consequence of the processor's limitedness, which is fantastic. So aesthetics is always important, and so is space, the spatial aspect of games. I feel that the best video games are the ones that have really savvy architects that are behind them. And if they're not architects bona fide, trained as architecture, they have that feeling. But the spatial evolution in video games is extremely important. Time, the way we experience time in video games, as in other forms of interaction design, is really quite amazing. It can be real time, or it can be the time within the game, as is in Animal Crossing, where seasons follow each other at their own pace. So time, space, aesthetics, and then most important, behavior. The real core issue of interaction design is behavior. Designers that deal with interaction design behaviors that go to influence the rest of our lives. They're not just limited to our interaction with the screen. In this case, I'm showing you Marble Madness, which is a beautiful game in which the controller is a big sphere that vibrates with you. So you have a sphere that's moving in this landscape, and the sphere, the controller itself, gives you a sense of the movement. In a way, you can see how video games are the purest aspect of interaction design and are very useful to explain what interaction is. We don't want to show the video games with the paraphernalia, no arcade nostalgia. If anything, we want to show the code. And here you see Ben Fry's Distella map of Pac-Man, or the Pac-Man code. So the way we acquired the games is very interesting and very unorthodox. You see them here displayed alongside other example of design, you know, furniture and other parts. But there's no paraphernalia, no nostalgia, only the screen and a little shelf with the controllers. The controllers are, of course, part of the experience, so you cannot do away with it. But interestingly, this choice was not condemned too vehemently by gamers. I was afraid that they would kill us, and instead they understood, especially when I told them that I was trying to apply the same stratagem that Philip Johnson applied in 1934 when he wanted to make people understand the importance of design. And he took propeller blades and pieces of machinery, and in the MoMA galleries, he put them on white pedestals against white walls as if they were Brancusi sculptures. He created this strange distance, this shock that made people realize how gorgeous formally and also important functionally designed pieces were. I would like to do the same with video games by getting rid of the sticky carpets and the cigarette butts and everything else that we might remember from our childhood. I want people to understand that those are important forms of design. And in a way, the video games, the fonts, and everything else lead us to make people understand a wider meaning for design. One of my dream acquisitions, which has been on hold for a few years, but now will come back on the front burner, is a 747. I would like to acquire it, but without owning it. I don't want it to be at MoMA and possessed by MoMA. I wanted to keep flying. So it's an acquisition where MoMA makes an arrangement with an airline and keeps the Boeing, the 747 flying. And the same with the @Sign that we acquired a few years ago. It was the first example of an acquisition of something that is in the public domain. And what I say to people, it's almost as if a butterfly were flying by and we captured the shadow on the wall and just we're showing the shadow. So in a way, we're showing a manifestation of something that is truly important and that is part of our identity, but that nobody can have. And it's too long to explain the acquisition, but if you want to go on the MoMA blog, there's a long post where I explain why it's such a great example of design. Along the way, I've had to burn a few chairs. You know, I have had to deal away with a few concepts of design past. But I see that people are coming along, that the audiences paradoxically are much more responsive and much more understanding of this expansion of design than some of my colleagues are. Design is truly everywhere, and design is as important as anything. And I'm so glad that because of its diversity and because of its centrality to our life, many more people are coming to it as a profession, as a passion, and as very simply part of their own culture. Thank you very much.